Hi everyone. In this lecture, we will talk about the Rayleigh random variable. So before we go to Rayleigh random variable, I'll just discuss a little bit about the joint distribution, joint Gaussian density function. So shown here is two Gaussian distribution functions, Gaussian density functions in x and y. Both the Gaussian functions have zero mean. So mu x equals mu y equals 0, and the variance is same, sigma x square is sigma y square is sigma square. But they both are, for the time being, we will assume that they both are independent random variables. Then the joint distributions. So if I look at the combination of the two events x and y, I can define a joint probability density function fxy of x comma y. That's given by the product of the individual density functions fx of x and fy of y. So I have to simply multiply this. I will get 1 by 2 sigma square into e power minus of x square plus y square by 2 sigma square. I can also represent this joint density function in xy as in a polar coordinate. So if I use this substitution, r is root of x square plus y square and theta as tan inverse of y by x, then I'd get this expression. Now if you look at this polar representation, okay, it shows a very interesting result. It shows that at any given value of r, this joint density function is independent of theta. So which means in a two-dimensional plane, in an r theta plane, or even in an xy plane, if I draw a circle of radius r, where r is root of x square plus y square, then the probability is same on all the points on the circle. Okay, so now we will visualize how does it look in a three-dimensional plane. So I have actually shown here, may not be very clear, but on a three-dimensional plane, so this is x, y, x and y. So if I plot it, you will actually have a complicated three-dimensional graph. So so here you can ignore the x and y axis. So you can assume that this is origin. Okay, so you can ignore these x and y axis. I just picked an image from the internet to show how a three-dimensional function will look like, a three-dimensional probability density function. So this is how the three-dimensional probability density function, at least a very close approximation of a Gaussian joint density function for two random variables x and y. So what I am trying to say here is that if let's say I draw a circle like this, then these are all points, equiprobable points. Another important point is that if I rotate this graph around origin, if I rotate this graph, the graph is going to look the same in any direction as you see, right? Because it only depends upon r. So it is, if you see, it is 1 by 2 pi sigma square e power minus r square by 2 sigma square. So radially in any direction it's going to look the same. So it's rotationally invariant. So even if I rotate along this on the third dimension axis, so I can call it a z axis. If I rotate it, the function is going to look the same. Okay, so keeping these 2 points in mind, we will now try to look at this function. So this is our joint density function of two Gaussian random variables x and y, written in polar form. Now I'll define a new variable called z, which is written as root of x square plus y square. That is nothing but r of the polar of the the r theta plane. Z is root of x square plus y square, where x and y are two Gaussian distributed random variables. I am just squaring, adding the two and taking a square root. That z, if you notice carefully, it's nothing but it's r in the r theta plane. Now I am interested in finding what is the probability of f of z equals to z. What is the probability of z? Now before we mathematically solve it, let's guess intuitively how will the mathematical function look like. If I want to plot the probability density function of z. So what I am doing is I am conducting an experiment, two independent experiments x and y, and then I am picking the outcomes of x, squaring the outcomes of y, and adding the two and taking a square root. Okay, and then taking a square root of the two. And this function of random variables is what I am calling it as z. And I am asking you to find what is the probability density function of z, given that you know probability density function of x and y. And you also know they are independent. This is the knowledge given to us. Using that, we have to find the probability density function of z. Now what I am saying that is that if you look at closely at what exactly is z, that is nothing but your r. where r is your the distance r in your r theta plane in a polar coordinate system. So all I need to do is find the probability density of r, then I'm done. That's nothing but equivalent to probability density of z, where just a variable, r is just a variable name. Here it is, we are just calling it as z here. Now let's guess intuitively what should be the values. So now if you see the value of z here, x, even though x can take minus infinity to plus infinity, when you square it, it's going to take values from 0 to infinity. So similarly, when you square y, it's going to take values from 0 to infinity. And when you add them and take a root, the value of z is also going to go from 0 to infinity. So that is clear to us. So if you see quickly, what is the probability that the value, the function is going to take z is equal to 0? I mean, of course, it's a single event, so we can say it is 0, but we'll try to say what is near z, z plus delta z. Around 0, what is the probability? For z to be equal to 0, both x and y have to be equal to 0. Right? So that is nothing but locus of all the points on the two-dimensional plane on a circle. Right? That is x square plus y square. That is the distance on the circle. That's the locus of all the points. So for z to be 0, the radius of the circle has to be 0. Okay? So which means both x and y are simultaneously 0 at that point. And for that to happen, the probability will be 0. So we can intuitively say that f z of z, if I try to plot f z of z, it's going to start at 0. Unlike a Gaussian distribution, it's really high at 0, but this function, new function z, which is square root of x square plus y square, will start at 0. Because for z to be 0, both x and y have to be simultaneously exactly equal to 0. That's the only event which will correspond to giving us z equal to 0. So that probability will obviously be 0. Now as I increase the value of z, meaning I'm increasing the value of x and y, then obviously we can see that, then if I increase the value of x and y, then we can obviously see that there are more possible values of x and y for which I'm going to get a finite value of z. Okay, so then there I can say that probability is increasing, we can say the probability is increasing. For any value of z greater than 0, okay, there are large number of values of x and y that are going to satisfy that. So we can say, okay, since we have in fact, you can have infinite number of values of x and y which will satisfy for any z. For example, I'll assume z is 1. Then all the points lying on the circle of radius 1, okay, will satisfy that. So to find the probability z equals to 1, you have to find what are the different probabilities for x equal to 1 and y equal to 1. The square root of x square plus y square should be equal to 1. So we know that, okay, it's definitely not 0, it's going to be greater than 0. So the probability will increase like this. So I'm showing in this graph, the probability here will increase. Now for z to be infinity, both x and y should be really large. Right? If for z to be infinity, both x and y should be really, really large. So we know again, probability of x being equal to infinity is again 0, because for a Gaussian distributed function, it's going to go to 0 like this. We can even see from this graph itself. So when your x and y are going farther away, when you are going farther away on the x and y plane, the probabilities are going to go to 0. So again we know that, therefore the probability of z when you move away to infinity is going to be 0. So we can see that the slope of this new probability density function of z, fz of z, increases at 0, and its slope is reducing, or slope is negative for large values of z, slope is positive for small values of z. Okay, so which means somewhere the slope has gone to 0, and since probabilities are only positive, there is only a maxima here. Okay, so the function should look something like this. So this is what we should guess. So it should be 0 at origin, 0 at infinity as well. So it's obviously not a Gaussian. When you square and add and then take a square root, the resulting function is not going to be a Gaussian, obviously. So we'll see what is that function. So our goal is to find fz of z. That we said z is simply equal to r, that is f r of r. So what is the probability, okay, at a certain radial distance r away from the origin? We just said that for when you take two independent Gaussian random variables and then try to plot its joint density function, we said the probability is same across the radial distance. Okay, and that was simply given by this e 1 by 2 pi sigma square. The probability here is simply 1 by 2 pi sigma square e power minus r square by 2 sigma square. Okay, so but we are supposed to find for all values of r along the circle, along the circle. So the value of the density function is same. Okay, so if I integrate the density function along this circumference of the circle, I will get the density function in r. So since it is same, the probability is same along the circumference, I can simply multiply by the length of the circumference, which is 2 pi r. So when I multiply that, I will get r by sigma square into e power, the 2 pi and 2 pi cancel out, so we will be left with r by sigma square into e power r square by 2 sigma square. Okay, so I know the joint density function, which is given by this. If I integrate it along the circumference of this circle, I am going to get the probability of r, f r of r. Okay, so for different values of r, it's independent of theta, so we have to integrate it along this entire circle. And since the value is same for all the values, for any value on the circle, so we can simply multiply the whole thing by 2 pi r. Okay, so we get this. Otherwise, I had introduced the joint and marginal distributions. How to find marginal distribution? You'll have to actually integrate it r d theta and you will get the same result. I am just using intuition here. Okay, so what you get here is this function r by sigma square into e power minus r square by 2 sigma square. So this distribution, which is generated by taking two independent Gaussian random variables and squaring them, adding them, x square plus y square, is what we call as a Rayleigh distributed random variable, a Rayleigh distributed random variable. Okay, so this is definitely different from Gaussian random variable because it starts at 0 and eventually when r becomes equal to infinity, it again goes to 0. So somewhere we said it's going to peak, and that maxima can be very easily found by differentiating it. You can see that it will be exactly be equal to the sigma of the independent Gaussian random variables x and y, and the peak value will be 1 by root of e sigma square. So for a Rayleigh distributed random, see, you should understand here, this is actually f r of r, but r is just a variable. You can also write f z of z. Okay, so this is z and this will be f z of z. Z equal to root of x square plus y square here happens to be the radial distance in an r theta plane. It's a coincidence that we chose a function like that. That's it. So that's why I just introduced the polar coordinates in the previous lecture, so we can just quickly find it out here. Okay, so I hope only this step, maybe just for the beginners, it might not be very trivial. So how did I find the probability of f z equal to z? What is f z equal to z? It is nothing but the probability that, or the probability of the values on this circle, right? And I just use the fact that it is equiprobable. That's an equiprobable point. On all the points on this circumference, this probability is same, which is the probability density function is same. So then all I need to do was just to multiply by 2 pi r to get the marginal density function, or the probability of f of z equal to z. Okay, so I ideally have to properly, if I had to integrate f r theta of r comma theta into r d theta going from 0 to 2 pi. I should have done this ideally, but I just used the very simple fact that there was no variable theta here, so I just exploited that fact and simply said multiplied by 2 pi r. That's it. Okay, so that's it about Rayleigh distributed random variables. So now we'll very quickly compute again the same mean and variance. To find the mean, that is E of z, is simply E of r, because z is a radial distance, so on a two-dimensional plane. So I'll just quickly go to an r theta plane. The analysis becomes easier. So you will be left with this integral 0 to infinity r square by sigma square into e power minus r square by 2 sigma square dr. Now to evaluate this integral, we will just use this standard result. That is, the variance, we know the variance of a zero mean Gaussian random variable is sigma square. So that is, this integral value is simply sigma square. And since Gaussian random variable is symmetric around the origin, and when I multiply it by x square, which is an even function, so it's going to be symmetric around the origin. So I can simply write it as 2 times 0 to infinity, and I've brought this sigma to denominator here. So you get x square by sigma square into this term e power minus x square by 2 sigma square will simply be equal to root of 2 pi into sigma. So finally, if I take the 2 to this side, I will be left with integral 0 to infinity x square by sigma square into e power minus x square by 2 sigma square is root of pi by 2 into sigma. And that is nothing but what we had here, this value of this integral. So the mean of I've called it as mu z, is the mean of the Rayleigh random variable is root of pi by 2 into sigma. Okay, see here you should understand x and y are zero mean random variables. Okay, but when you square and add them, that new variable z definitely will not have a zero mean, because you are squaring and adding them. So it has values from 0 to infinity. So the mean cannot be 0. If it takes negative values with equal probability, then we can say the mean will be 0. Okay, but since it's not taking negative values, you can't say the mean is 0. X and y have 0 mean, but when you square and them, add them and take square root, that is not going to have a 0 mean. So that mean is actually proportional to the variance. Okay, so root of pi by 2 into sigma. I think I've given one of the questions wherein you are supposed to calculate sigma from this, so you can do that. The next step is to calculate variance. So for that we'll first calculate expected value of z square. So that will be simply expected value of x square plus y square. So that is expected value of x square plus expected value of y square. I've just used Cartesian coordinates here because it's easier to find that here this way. Okay, again this is nothing but sigma square. They are both are zero mean random variables, so expected value of x square is equal to sigma square itself. Ideally it is sigma square plus mu x square, but since mu is 0, I have ignored that term. So you'll be left with 2 sigma square. So this term is 2 sigma square. So the variance is given by expected value of z square minus mu z square. So you substitute the values, you will get this expression, sigma square into 4 minus pi by 2. So that's the variance of the Rayleigh random variable. So this is it. This is what you need to know to solve question number 3 in your assignment. So you just know the variance. You should use these equations to calculate the variance and mean, I think, and also you are supposed to plot it. So from MATLAB, x and y, you know how to generate the random variables, Gaussian random variables in MATLAB, and then you have to manually square the two random variables and take square root, and you are supposed to generate a new variable z. So there are a lot of functions in MATLAB itself, how to plot z now. You are supposed to plot the distribution probability density function of z. Okay, so that's what you are supposed to plot. You can use, there is a function called histogram. You can use that function. What histogram does, I'll let you study. That's a very, very trivial function. I think, with so much of data sciences, everyone doing so many data science courses, I think that's a very trivial thing. You can go through that. You can use that function, or you can use any mathematical function to plot. I eventually want you to plot fz of z from the data of z. You're running an experiment. You're finding sample values of z. From those sample values of z, you should tell me what is the probability density function. Okay, histogram generally gives you that, so that's why I told you to do that. But how do you plot? You can either use I'm okay with you using the standard MATLAB function, or I'll be happy even if you use a mathematical function to generate it. Okay, the next lecture I'll post how to solve question number 2 and 4.